You found us. You shouldn't have.
Careful now. Don't let your mind wander too far into the fear. You've tuned into the mind of nightmares. This is Hear Your Fear, where the nightmares aren't imagined, they're remembered. Close your eyes. Open your mind. Now, let the nightmares begin.
This is The House Built in 1848, a retelling of the incident originally told by Reddit user Hopeful Carpet 7716. When you're a child, a house can feel alive. Every wall, every floorboard, every draft that whispers through the hallways. They all seem to be holding their breath, watching. I was 6 years old when my family moved into the country home that would define my childhood. A house built in 1848, older than any of us could wrap our heads around. It stood apart, distant from neighbors, cocooned in acres of open property. That kind of isolation made it perfect for my parents. They were still building their landscaping business then, and the space gave them everything they needed. Room to expand, room to dream. But for me, the space was different. The fields weren't freedom. They were distance. Distance between me and help. Distance between me and anyone who might hear me scream. The house had no neat history book waiting for us. My parents checked the libraries, flipped through old newspapers, even asked around. Nothing. No records, no headlines, no stories of who had lived there. Just its year, 1848. A name carved into time and left to stand. At first, life settled in, running through long hallways, smell of dinner on the stove, summer nights with the windows open. Normal. Or at least, we try to believe that. But the house had its own way of reminding us it was older than our memories. Because every so often, someone would see a man walking past the downstairs window, a shape moving quick, just enough to catch the corner of your eye. My mom saw it once, then a neighbor, and an uncle visiting for dinner. Always the same description. A man's silhouette crossing just beyond the glass. And always the same ending. No one ever came to the door. At first, we brushed it off. Tricks of the eyes, reflections, the way light plays games in old glass. But deep down, every one of us knew better. Because when you've lived long enough in a house like that, you feel the difference between imagination and presence. I grew up with that presence. The sense that there was always someone just beyond reach, circling the house, watching. And for years it was background noise, until the night the noise became much louder. It was Canada Day. My parents were out at a party, the kind of party that ran late into the night, but I wasn't with them. I was a quiet kid, shy. I didn't like crowds, didn't like the noise, and so I begged to stay behind. They gave in, and I told myself I was glad for the silence. That night, I sat cross-legged on the old couch in the living room, watching Dumb and Dumber, Something about that goofy movie made the house feel less heavy. For an hour and a half, I laughed at their nonsense, at the absurdity. For an hour and a half, I didn't look out the windows. But movies end, and when the credits rolled, the weight of the house returned. It was just past 10:30. I figured my parents would be back soon, so I started up the stairs, brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas, normal things, rituals that were supposed to be safe. I froze. At first I thought it was them. My parents had this habit. If the door was locked, they'd knock hard just to get me moving. It made sense in my head. My body wanted to believe it. So I leaned over the upstairs railing, waiting, listening. But nothing followed. No voices, no footsteps, just silence. A cold feeling started pressing into my chest. I crept to the window overlooking the driveway. My parents' truck wasn't there. My stomach dropped. That wasn't my parents. That wasn't anyone I wanted in the house. Something in me wanted to be smart, to hide. So I bolted, down the hall into the bathroom, the only room in the entire house that had a lock. I twisted the lock until it clicked and pressed my back against the door, my heart pounding in my ears. For the first time in my life, I realized how small that room really was. Nowhere to go but here. That's when I pulled out the phone. Not to call the police, not yet. I was 11, shy, afraid of causing a scene. So instead, I called my best friend down the street. My voice shook so hard I could barely get the words out. I think someone's breaking into my house. Please, get your dad, please. Her voice came back sharp, panicked. Hang up. Call the police now. And then, as if the house wanted to prove her right, the loudest bang yet exploded from downstairs. She heard it through the phone. Her dad heard it. And in that instant, all I could think was, I'm going to die here tonight. I sat on the cold tile floor, my back pressed so hard into the bathroom door I could feel every shake of the wood with each new crash from downstairs. I clutched the phone to my ear, whispering frantically into it. My best friend was still on the other end. She was only a kid too, but she heard it. That violent explosion of sound from my house. She didn't laugh, didn't second guess me. Hang up and call 911, she begged. Call right now. So I did. The operator answered with the calm tone only emergency dispatchers know how to summon. But when I tried to explain, my voice was so broken with sobs she could barely understand me. I kept saying, There's someone in my house. Please, they're downstairs. They're breaking things. And then it happened again. The dispatcher paused. They spoke more firmly. I can hear that. Stay where you are. Officers are on their way. She could hear it through the phone. The relentless pounding, the violent crashes. Even she knew something was inside with me. Those next minutes crawled. Every second felt like its own lifetime. I sat there, knees pulled to my chest, phone trembling in my hand. My whole body was shaking, waiting for footsteps to climb the stairs, waiting for the bathroom doorknob to turn. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me what I could see, what I could hear, but all I could say was the same thing over and over. It's so loud, it won't stop. At one point, I covered the mouthpiece and just prayed, silently, desperately, that my parents would pull into the driveway before whoever it was reached me. But the driveway stayed empty, and still the banging grew louder. The dispatcher's voice cut through my sobs. They're outside now. Stay on the line until they reach you. And then silence. Not the silence of safety, not the silence of an empty house, but the heavy, suffocating silence of something that stops moving when it knows it's being hunted. They're inside. Hold tight. My heart was hammering so hard I thought they'd hear it before they found me. For minutes that felt like hours. I listened for boots on the stairs, for any sound to tell me the police had made it inside. Instead, all I had was that quiet. Finally. Police, you can come out now. I scrambled up, unlocked the bathroom door, and stepped out. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I followed them cautiously downstairs, bracing myself for shattered furniture, broken glass, torn curtains, evidence of whatever had been raging through the house. But there was nothing. No overturned tables, no splintered wood, no shattered windows. The officers swept the rooms, checked the locks, even shined flashlights into corners as if they expected to flush out some hidden intruder. They found nothing. I stood in the middle of the living room, trembling, my cheeks still wet from tears. One officer turned back toward me with an expression I'll never forget. Suspicion mixed with pity. As if I had dreamt it all. As if the wreckage in my chest didn't matter because the room around me was pristine. But the dispatcher had heard it. My best friend had heard it. I had heard it. There had been banging, violent, furious banging. Yet in that moment, staring at the stillness of my home, I felt a different kind of fear take root. The fear that maybe this house wasn't going to let me prove what I knew was true. That whatever had been inside could vanish when it chose to. That it could return whenever it wanted. The police eventually left. One of them gave me a stiff nod before closing the door behind him, like he'd decided I was just another kid with an overactive imagination. But I knew what I'd heard. The dispatcher knew. My best friend knew. And yet the house looked untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. That was 10 years ago. I'm older now, and I've moved far away from that 1848 farmhouse. But the memory never left me. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I'll hear that echo in my head. Not a knock, not a creak, but a demand, as if something wanted in, or wanted me out. And the strangest part, I never heard it again. Not once in all the years that followed, which almost makes it worse. Because if it had been someone breaking in, you'd expect another attempt. If it had been an animal, or some trick of old wood, the sound would have repeated itself. But no, just that one night, that one relentless storm of rage, heard not just by me, but by two others miles away over the phone. And so, sometimes I catch myself wondering, did the house know I was alone that night? Did it wait years, watching quietly through those downstairs windows, until the exact moment it could finally speak to me? Or was it something older than the house itself? Something that had been waiting in the ground, patient, until it had an audience? I don't know, but I do know this. Even now, when I hear a knock at my door, my stomach turns cold. Because I'll never forget how it sounded when the house I lived in, the one built in 1848, decided to knock back. You Are in My Realm, a retelling of incident originally told by Reddit user Bandy53. We live in a farmhouse that's been standing for over a century and a half. Old wood, old walls, old history. The kind of place that creaks when you breathe too hard, that whispers at night even when no one's speaking. It was during our very first week there that the house decided to introduce itself. My phone, an iPhone, sat 5 or 6 feet away on the table. I hadn't touched it in nearly half an hour. No notifications, no reason it should have woken up. And then, in the stillness of the room, Siri's voice broke the silence.
You are in my realm.
The words froze me. I just stared at the phone. The history log showed nothing. No text, no trigger, no command. And yet, that flat, mechanical voice had spoken like it knew something I didn't. A chill spread through the room, not just because of what was said, but because it felt deliberate, like a greeting, a warning. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't dare. And from that moment on, the house never felt like it was fully ours. Because if a machine could be compelled to speak for something unseen, then maybe something unseen was already watching. Months passed, and we tried to settle into life inside those old walls. But one night, my cat decided the quiet was no longer safe. She jolted me awake, pacing at the foot of my bed. Her meows weren't her usual cries for food or attention. They were urgent, insistent. She wouldn't stop until I sat up, and when I did, she turned, trotting to the bedroom door, glancing back at me as if to say, "Follow." So I did. She led me down the stairs, her tail flicking with agitation. When we reached the bottom, she walked into the middle of the living room and stopped. Then she sat, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the top of the staircase, the very place we had just descended. I waited. I checked the stove, the outlets, the doors, half expecting something obvious, something explainable. But everything was normal. Nothing was burning, nothing was broken, except the silence. The silence in that house was wrong. Usually there was always some faint groan of the timbers, or the wind clawing through the siding. But that night, nothing. It was a silence so deep it pressed against my ears, like the air itself had stopped moving. And there was my cat, unmoving, staring toward the stairs, as if she saw something standing there. That's when I decided to go back upstairs, and that's when I found out silence wasn't the only thing waiting. I turned from my cat and started back toward the stairs. That's when it happened. Halfway across the room, I stepped down and felt it. A patch of the floor that didn't feel right. For a split second, I thought I had stepped in water. My sock clung cold against the wood. But when I bent down to check, the boards were bone dry. What I had felt wasn't wetness. It was cold. So cold it bit through the fabric like ice water. The hair on the back of my neck rose. I pushed myself back to standing, trying to shake it off, and that's when I felt it. A hand, resting firm and deliberate on my right shoulder. Every nerve in my body seized. I spun, expecting, praying to see someone standing there. But the room was empty. The silence returned, and with it, the heavy certainty that I was not alone. My cat, still at the center of the room, staring at the stairs as if she hadn't missed a thing. And I understood. This wasn't just a house. It was occupied. And whatever was there wasn't finished making itself known. After that night, the strangeness became routine. Doors would ease open on their own, swinging wide when no draft could explain it. But the strangest pattern was with the remotes. One by one, they began to disappear. We'd set them on the coffee table, or leave them on the arm of a chair. Then, gone. No clatter, no misplacement, no sliding under a cushion, just vanished. 5 remotes in total, each one never seen again. And the thing is, we tore that room apart. During renovations, we cleared every single piece of furniture. Nothing left but bare floors and empty walls. There was nowhere for them to hide. No cracks, no voids. Still, nothing. It was as if the remotes had been lifted into thin air. A house can creak. A door can swing open. But objects? Tangible, solid objects? Don't just stop existing. Unless someone, or something, is taking them. The more they vanished, the more the house felt like it was playing with us. A game with rules only it understood. And then years later, I learned it wasn't just our game. The house had been playing it long before we ever arrived. 2 years later, I found myself wandering through a local flea market. Crowded aisles, the smell of dust and old wood, chatter and laughter filling the air. That's when I bumped into a former coworker I hadn't seen in ages. We caught up quickly, and she mentioned she lived nearby. Just around the corner, in fact. Then she pointed to a couple browsing a booth. "They used to live in your house," she said. My curiosity lit up. I walked over, introduced myself, and told them where I lived. Their eyes widened. No hesitation, no pause. And the first words out of their mouths were chilling. "So, how's the ghost doing?" I froze, stunned. They smiled like it was the most natural question in the world. And then they told me their story. Back in the 80s, when they lived in that very same farmhouse, the ghost was already there. And it had the same peculiar obsession: TV remotes. It had taken theirs too, over and over again. That was the moment I knew. The cold spots, the hand on my shoulder, the vanishing objects, the silence that swallowed the house whole. None of it was new. This wasn't our haunting. It was the house's legacy. And whatever called it its realm had been there far longer than us. And from the look in their eyes, I realized it wasn't going anywhere. The Man in the Yellow Raincoat. A retelling of the incident originally told by Reddit user Whale Baboon. This story takes us to Seoul, South Korea. About 10 years ago, a young mother carrying groceries and holding her daughter's hand stepped into the elevator of her apartment complex. A simple, everyday act, the kind you never think twice about. But on this day, someone was waiting inside. A man, cap pulled low, head bowed, face hidden, and a yellow raincoat, clinging to him even though the sky outside had been clear. Her stomach sank the moment she saw him. Something about the way he stood, stiff, silent, almost deliberate in concealing himself, made every nerve in her body scream. She pulled her daughter to her side, pressing the little girl against the corner furthest from him. And when she glanced at the elevator panel, her dread deepened. Her floor was the only button lit. No other destination, no one else to intervene. And then she noticed it, clutched close to his body, half hidden beneath the folds of that yellow raincoat. Something wrapped tightly in newspaper, too carefully bundled to be trash, too heavy in the way he held it to be anything harmless. The metal box ascended, floor by floor, the air inside thickening with unease. Every second stretched, her mind racing. She knew one thing. Whatever this man was hiding, she and her daughter were trapped with him until those doors opened again. And with her child at her side, she realized she couldn't just wait. She needed a plan. Her pulse hammered in her eyes. The elevator crawled upward, floor numbers blinking in slow succession. And in that suffocating silence, an idea struck her, a way to make him think she wasn't alone. She slipped her phone from her bag, flipped it open, and pressed it to her ear. Then she began to speak, loudly enough for him to hear.
Oh, 여보. I'm almost home. Can you open the door for me? I'm just on the elevator now. Yes, I'll be there in a minute. Can you have it unlocked?
Her words were careful, a script of safety, a husband at home, waiting, ready to greet her, a witness, a protector. Of course it was a lie. Her husband was miles away at work, but she prayed the illusion would hold. The elevator jolted, slowed, and then stopped. The doors parted, revealing the hallway of the 12th floor. She grabbed her daughter's hand, heart pounding, and stepped out. But her blood ran cold when she heard the shuffle of footsteps behind her. The man in the yellow raincoat had stepped out too. And though he lagged a few paces back, she could feel his eyes on her as she hurried toward her apartment door. What started as a quiet walk home had become a race for survival, and the finish line was her front door. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel, every step echoing too loudly against the walls. Her daughter's small hand clutched tight in her own. She walked as fast as she could without breaking into a full sprint. Behind them, the man's pace was different. Not hurried, not hesitant. Slow, steady, purposeful. As though he knew he had time. Her apartment door was only yards away now. She pressed her daughter forward, urging her along, and when they reached it, she pounded her fist against the wood.
Yoo-boo! I'm home. Please open the door.
She shouted, voice straining to sound casual, but loud enough to carry down the hall, again and again, banging, calling out, pretending her husband was just inside, about to turn the handle. For a moment, it seemed to work. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The man had slowed. He hovered mid-hallway, head still lowered beneath the brim of his cap. Then, like a predator reconsidering its prey, he turned and began to walk back toward the elevator. Relief swept through her chest, almost enough to make her knees buckle. Her lie had brought them safety, or so she thought, because what she did next gave her away, and nearly cost her her life. She waited until his back was turned, then yanked her daughter closer. Her hands trembled as she slid open the panel of her apartment's digital lock. Each button chirped loudly in the silence, too loudly, and with every beep, her heart dropped lower in her chest, because those sounds betrayed her. They told him what her voice had hidden. There was no husband waiting behind that door, no one else inside. She heard it, the sudden shift of footsteps, the shuffle becoming a sprint. Panic surged through her. The keypad flashed green, the lock clicked, and she flung the door open. The first thing she did was shove her daughter inside.
Go!
She screamed. Then she stumbled in after her, slamming the door with every ounce of strength she had left. She felt it. The air moved as he closed in, inches away. If she had been a second slower, his hand, his weapon, might have wedged through. Instead, the bolt slid home, the lock engaged. Her lungs burned as she pressed her back against the door. On the other side, only silence, until she dared to lean forward and peer through the peephole. And there he was, the man in the yellow raincoat, standing still for a moment, before finally turning away, walking calmly back toward the elevator. But the nightmare wasn't finished. Months later, she would see his face and realize just how close she and her daughter had come to death. Time passed. The incident became a memory she tried to bury. Though the image of that yellow raincoat haunted her dreams, her daughter was safe. That was what mattered. Months later, she sat in her living room, the television murmuring in the background. The news anchor's voice carried an edge of gravity. A serial killer had been captured in Seoul. The screen cut to grainy footage of his arrest. And there it was, the yellow raincoat, the same cap pulled low, hiding the same face she had never quite seen. Her blood ran cold. The man she had stood beside in the elevator. The man who followed her down the hall. The man who nearly forced his way into her home with her daughter inside. That man was S.O.U.N.D, one of the most notorious serial killers South Korea had ever known. In that moment, she understood the truth. She hadn't just escaped a stranger with bad intentions. She had come face to face with a real monster. And if not for a desperate lie, and a door that shut just in time, she and her daughter would not have survived to tell the story. Because sometimes, the evil we fear in our imaginations pales in comparison to the evil that actually walks among us. The man in the yellow raincoat wasn't just a shadow in the hallway. He was real, and his name was S.O.U.N.D. S.O.U.N.D is remembered as one of South Korea's most infamous serial killers. Active in the early 2000s, he confessed to murdering more than 20 people. His victims included wealthy elderly citizens, sex workers, and in some cases, entire families. His methods were brutal. He lured women under false pretenses, then bludgeoned them with blunt weapons. He dismembered bodies, burning or burying the remains to hide his crimes. Authorities later revealed that he even engaged in acts of cannibalism. The nation was horrified. Seoul had never seen a predator like him before. He was arrested in 2004 after a relentless investigation, and later sentenced to death, a sentence that has yet to be carried out. To this day, he remains on death row. For the woman in our story, that news broadcast was more than just another headline. It was confirmation of what her instincts had screamed in the elevator, that she had stood face to face with the killer, that her daughter's life and her own had brushed against the edge of something far darker than most of us will ever know. And when you picture that yellow raincoat, remember, it wasn't a disguise for the rain. It was the uniform of a monster who walked among us. Not Our Moms, a retelling of incident originally told by Reddit user Asks Lot of Questions. When I was 9 years old, we lived in a place most people would never imagine calling home. A remote military housing area, deep in the forest. Out there, the night belonged to the wild. Elephants, deer, even the occasional predator could pass through without warning. It was the kind of place where you learned early that silence didn't always mean safety. One night, our parents were called away to a formal event. Children weren't allowed, so it was just the four of us. Me, my friend Carl, and our little brothers, Sam and Duke, both around 5. We huddled inside my family's quarters on the second floor. Snacks spread across the table. Shrek playing on the old television. For a while, it felt normal, comforting even. But outside, beyond the glass, the forest pressed in. The kind of blackness where the tree line swallowed the stars, where even the air felt heavy. And in that darkness, the world seemed to hold its breath. We were just 4 kids, tucked away in a building surrounded by miles of wilderness. No parents, no neighbors nearby. Only the vast, empty night. And when the light suddenly went out, that night was no longer ours. We were halfway through the movie when it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The TV snapped off, plunging us into a sudden, suffocating dark. No hum of electricity, no glow from the screen. Just blackness pressing in from every side. For a few long seconds, none of us moved. We stood frozen, listening to the quiet. Then as quickly as they had vanished, the lights surged back on. Relief washed over us, but it wasn't comforting. If anything, the room felt colder, like the outage hadn't been random, like it had been a signal. We wandered toward the window, maybe just wanting to assure ourselves the world was still there. The forest outside stared back at us, silent, endless, and dark. And that's when I heard it.
Cindy? Cindy?
A voice, a woman's voice, calling my nickname. It sounded eerily similar to Carl's mom's voice, but something was off. Moreover, no one outside should have known that name. It was something only family used. And when I turned to Carl, I realized he'd heard something too, but not the same thing I did. I froze at the window, my heart clawing at my chest. That raspy voice still echoed in my ears, curling my name into something unnatural.
Did you hear that?
I whispered to Carl. His eyes were wide, his face pale. But when he spoke, his answer made my stomach twist. No, but I heard your mom. She was calling me.
Carl. Carl.
We both stood there, trembling. I heard his mother's voice calling for me, and he heard mine calling for him. But it wasn't them. It couldn't be. Our mothers were miles away, laughing in dresses and heels at some formal event. And yet here, outside our second-floor window, something was using their voice. Our younger brothers Sam and Duke chimed in too. They said they'd heard the voices as well. We wanted to believe they were just copying us, too little to understand what was happening, but the fear in their eyes told me otherwise. The voices knew our names. They knew the secret nicknames only family used, and that made darkness outside the window feel alive. So we did the only thing children could do in a house full of shadows. We tried to pretend it wasn't happening. We huddled back on the couch, pulling the blankets tight around us. The movie flickered back to life on the screen, filling the room with familiar voices and colors, but it couldn't drown out the unease. Every shadow felt longer. Every creak of the house made us flinch. None of us dared to look toward the window again. Instead, we sat there, pretending to laugh at jokes we weren't really hearing, waiting for the sound of our parents' car pulling into the lot. When they finally returned that night, heels clicking, ties loosened, the fear we'd been holding in spilled out. Carl and I told them everything. The voices, the names, the impossible calls from outside. But they only exchanged weary smiles.
You've just been watching too many movies. It was probably a dream, or your imagination.
They brushed it off as nothing more than children spooking themselves in the dark. We wanted to believe them. We wanted to forget. But even as we nodded, even as we tried to sleep that night, the truth gnawed at us. We had heard them, and it wasn't our imagination. And years later, when the memory resurfaced, we would learn we weren't the only ones who still remembered. Almost 9 years passed. Carl and I hadn't spoken much since those days, life pulling us in different directions. But when we finally met again, laughter and nostalgia turned into something else. Somehow, that night crept back into the conversation. And when I mentioned it, Carl's face changed. His voice grew quiet. I remember every second of it. The hallway, the window, the voices calling our names. Not imagined, not misheard, not a dream. Then his brother Duke spoke up too. He remembered, clear as day. Even my brother Sam, though younger at the time, recalled fragments, just enough to confirm the shadows of the memory. We weren't crazy. We hadn't dreamed it. Whatever had stood outside that window, whatever had mimicked our mother's voices with the unnatural rasp, it was real. I still don't know what it was or why it called out to us, but I know one thing. It wasn't our moms, and it wasn't human. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters you see in the forest. They're the ones that sound like the people you trust most, standing right outside your window. This concludes the stories for the Hear Your Fear Show, Episode 1. Tonight, you've heard 4 voices of fear, 4 true accounts that remind us how fragile the line between safety and terror really is. A phone that spoke with a message it was never programmed to say. A farmhouse where unseen hands still claim what belongs to them. An elevator ride that turned out to be a brush with one of the world's most dangerous killers. And children who heard their mothers' voices in the night when their mothers were miles away. Different places, different people, but the same lesson. Fear doesn't always hide in shadows or strike in the places we expect. Sometimes it slips through the walls of a house you just moved into. Sometimes it rides the elevator with you. Sometimes it whispers your name in the dark. And that's what makes these stories so terrifying. Because they weren't pulled from a script. They didn't happen to characters on a screen. They happened to real people, just like you. So before you lock the doors tonight, before you shut off the lights and settle in for sleep, ask yourself, are you sure you're alone? Until next time, if there is a next time. If this story stirs something in you, you're not alone. I invoke you to join the sound, the seekers of unraveling nightmarish dread. Your only expectation now is to return. Return for another session with the Mind of Nightmares. You've been listening. That makes you a seeker. But don't stop there. Embrace the darkness. The one gnawing at the edges of your mind, crawling down your spine, whispering to you from the static. You feel it, don't you? In the pit of your stomach, that truth, that pool. You're one of us. So become more than a listener. Become a member of the Society of Unraveling Nightmarish Dread by subscribing, liking, and following the Mind of Nightmares across all realms. YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram. And now, for those of you who have fully embraced the nightmare, who hear the mind not as a voice, but as a command, feed the mind. Feed it your fears, feed it your stories, feed it by sharing the signal. Inject our frequency into the veins of their stream. That's how you rise. That's how you become a sentinel, a guard of the mind, a leader in the dark, a sentinel of unraveling nightmarish dread. This is the Mind of Nightmares, and we are S.O.U.N.D. You've been listening to your inner thoughts. You may now return to your regularly scheduled broadcast.
Hey, wake up. You look like you were trapped in a crazy dream. Or maybe more like a heavy...
Nightmares.